What is that saying to the country? The prime minister is saying, I'm not going to be giving I won't do the budget speech. We hardly saw her. I think somebody glimpsed her outside the parliament, but well, I didn't see her sitting. I might be wrong. Sitting inside, when the estimates. I didn't see her in there. And now we're being told she's not going to give the budget speech. As a former senator, what is that saying to the people of Barbados, in your opinion? Good night, Miss McClean. You're
Good
muted.
night.
You're
Yeah.
muted, Miss McClean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good night. Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we're hearing
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it just says to me that one more time, the Minister of Finance, because the Prime Minister, in presenting a budget speech, will be presenting in her responsibility, her capacity as Minister of Finance, that she has decided that maybe the job is too big for her, in terms of presenting it. And the reason I say that is that on no occasion, from my observation, since the Prime Minister has been Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, has she generally tackled tough economic issues in terms of explaining them and so on. If I remember correctly, there might have been a time during her tenure as Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, that we did not have a budget. If I am wrong, somebody can correct me.
Yes, that's correct.
We did not have a budget. Last year, the Prime Minister was in for a major shock. I don't believe neither the Prime Minister nor her parliamentary colleagues expected the kind of incisive, in-depth, highly analytical presentation of the leader of the opposition. It is not my words, but somebody suggested to me that maybe she's hiding from the leader of the opposition. But I also say this, in all that we heard yesterday, slipped into the conversation and the comments made by the Prime Minister in relation to what I see to be a forced reshuffle, and I can come back to that. The Prime Minister spoke of Berth 3, a third IMF arrangement. And I can't, because I would probably get cut if you had a 10-second delay, repeat how people describe what that is going to do to Barbadians. But the expectation is that with all that we know in terms of borrowing, etc., the budget will have some very tough or bad news for Bajans. And as I heard somebody suggest earlier, based again on the evidence, the Prime Minister typically delegates bad news to different, she doesn't become the bearer of bad news. So somebody else will be delegated the responsibility. And so I also believe that the Prime Minister is showing fatigue in terms of domestic matters. Because if we want to be honest and fair, and I can substantiate anything I say, the Prime Minister has found herself playing musical chairs with her ministers. If you dissect ministry by ministry, you would realize that there are no stellar accomplishments. There are substantial failures. The Prime Minister came in, she talked about, I'm trying to remember the terms that were spelled. Let me first use the two that I remember. She talked about deconstructing and reconstructing. And I think that Rose did an excellent job in showing how she has deconstructed for the second time. In this case, the Ministry of Education. And I would say to you, we no longer have a Ministry of Education. We have two ministries which will carry out some of the functions of a Ministry of Education. And if you go to the Education Act, it talks about providing an integrated education and all of that, but we can come back to that later. Basically, I think the Prime Minister is a person who gets enthused and excited by ideas, maybe generated by herself, maybe an amalgam of ideas from others, and she runs with them, but there is a lack of in-depth, serious analysis. I'll give you an example. And I was reading as I was listening earlier. I went to look, and this was an article of February the 4th, 2022 news. Academic shift. This was the opening of Parliament after the last election. And you know, the president is given a throne speech to read, which is essentially the plan, an element of a, let's say, a strategic plan or the plans of the government. And it says academic shift, Education Act to be replaced. President announces major changes in education. I'll quickly read a couple lines here because some of it has fallen through the window. Barbados' education system is in for major shakeup. Marking the first sitting of Parliament as a Republic state, President of Barbados, Her Excellency the Most Honorable Dame Sandra Mason, announced plans to replace the Education Act of 1983 during the President's address at the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Center today. The President said that the new legislation will be more suited for modern developments in the educational system. Education will be more focused on problem solving, critical thinking, and lifelong learning, the President read. I would have assumed that that was very much a part of education from the time I was a child. And I left secondary school in 1974. I left primary school in 1966, the year we became independent. So President Dame Sandra Mason declared the Barbados Secondary School examination commonly known as 11 plus to be abolished and replaced with a middle school system, etc., etc. So that is supportive of what we've seen manifested: chaos and confusion. Unfortunately, it does not only characterize education. And if I can continue a bit more, I want to say something about the Marsha Cattle ministry and the movement. And I talked about musical chairs. Marsha Cattle, former Minister of Economic Affairs and Investment, former minister, now that she's resigned, a Minister of Industry, Innovation, Science and Technology, a ministry called MIST. And it so happened, by some divine order, I was in Parliament yesterday with a number of women, including Shakwani, from the Democratic Labour Party to support our political lead and lead of the opposition. And that ministry was supposed to have been presented after lunch, the Ministry of Industry, Innovation, Science and Technology. But in my preparation, because I like to read upon these things, and as I said to you, on this show, that if I could be of any help to the senators and to the leader of the opposition, I would. So I do read. I will say this, Marcia, my evaluation is, and I use the word chaos again, like the Ministry of Education, MIST is a mystery. It is confusion. And so I don't know if for the second time, Minister Cattle, she's one of the people I thought was more intellectually sound of her cabinet colleagues, but from all that I hear, I don't know about her people skills, etc. And so while I observe that, I know what it takes to run a ministry. But all I can tell you, if you go and dissect the components of that ministry, if you look at BIDC, which calls itself Export Barbados now, and we can go through them, one of the critical things that they were responsible for is this whole issue of the whole question of technology and transformation, in a digital environment and so on. We know of all the chaos that we've had across government ministries with hacking and cyber attacks and all of these things. Now, so my concern is that I've heard what the former Minister Cattle said, and that may very well be an important part of her decision. But I would like to know, and I really wanted to hear, because of all that I had garnered in my intelligence gathering, I would have wanted to hear from the public officers, because they have brought the public officers, and to hear from the minister herself, what were the accomplishments of that ministry and what were the plans. Now, I'll finish by saying this. As I looked in the musical chairs that happened, Kay McConney was Minister of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, which is basically where Minister Cattle went in the second iteration as a minister. She didn't work well. It didn't work out there because her technological innovations weren't very smart. We didn't see them. So then she became Minister of Education, Technology, and Vocational Training. And what did we have? Rose talked about it. I don't have to repeat it, but I can tell you chaos again. And now she is going to where Marcia Cattle was in the first iteration, to the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment, which is part of the behemoth that constitutes the Prime Minister's portfolios. So all I can tell you is, in conclusion, that the Prime Minister was forced, as far as I can see, to make changes. I am not sure if, in the case of former Minister Cattle, that she jumped before she was pushed. I think that in the case of Kay McConnell, she was pulled out of the ministry after, of course, demonstrating that in two ministries she really had nothing much to show. And I suspect that it will be business as usual when she goes to her third ministry. Confusion, chaos, a lot of long talk, many hands in the work, but the flip side of that is too many cooks spoil the broth, and we will have deconstruction with no construction.
If you choose to interject.
Generally, you're not supposed to speak. A member of the House or Senate is supposed to speak in silence. Now, that in reality does not happen. However, two things. One, the leader of government business, whether in the Senate or House, should be able to control those persons, and the leader of the opposition, that person, if there are multiple persons, should be able to do the same. I think part of what you might be referring to is in the arrangement in the House now for the estimates. It is in a committee of supply, so you have a chairman of committees. Yeah. Again, the chairman is expected to do so, but I think what you may find, and I was not a member of the House, so I would have to scrutinize the standing orders of the House, because we don't debate in the same way in the Senate this particular piece of legislation, the appropriations bill. But I think it is expected that the person as a chair would be as neutral as possible. And there's something that bothers me, because they tell you you're not supposed to hear size. In other words, you're speaking through the chair to the public and to your colleague MPs or fellow senators. And so you're not supposed to be hearing and responding to them. But the reality is, if you have a barrage of speaking, noise, and so on, it disturbs your train of thought. And therefore, a decent chair, a responsible chair, and a chair who is trying to be as objective and neutral as possible, will ask those people to stop. Now, if I were doing that, my way was saying is, Mr. President or Madam Chair, or whatever, Madam President, can you assist me in asking these people to be quiet, because it is disturbing me. It is preventing me from speaking sensibly, because it's disturbing my thoughts. But I think, unfortunately, people, I don't like what I've been seeing in the House, whether it is the acting president, the chair, the speaker, sorry, I'm confusing the two places, the speaker, the deputy speaker, or the chairman of committees. In many ways, they come across as biased in a lot of instances. And what makes it worse is that they should appreciate that you have 28 persons sitting on the other side in theory, because you don't ever see all of them in there at any one time. You have one person. And I think that in the interest of fairness, those kind of things should be considered. But above all things, what I can say, and I take my hat off to the leader of the opposition, he handles himself well. I think because of his years as a
Ms. McClean or anybody can answer this question about Ryan Strawn.
I was trying to check my understanding, and I haven't heard anything changing. Remember, the Prime Minister has a whole battery of ministers of and ministers in. And the minister of is what I would call the substantive minister. And I haven't heard her say otherwise. I was trying to Google it as the caller was speaking, but my understanding is the Prime Minister continues to be Minister of Finance, and Minister Strawn is the Minister in.
The Minister of Finance.
Yeah, so I will check it, and if I see something differently, I would let you know.
Yeah, that's my understanding too, Ms. McClean. So it's very similar to the Minister of Culture is the Prime Minister, and then
Minister in is
right, and so right, do you have a minister in? In the whatever, some weird something, but yeah. Your next
Also,
question. Anybody wants to tackle the next question? Did you remember the next question?
No, I don't. I think you should leave that one alone.
Okay, the second
Yeah,
question.
the part of what she said might be misunderstood.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
right.
so
Okay, so I can say, like someone said before, that a prime minister does not deliver bad news.
well, that is my thinking that but not that prime minister doesn't. This one doesn't. Other prime ministers have delivered whatever news they had to deliver. But the record will
No, this
show
one
that the
doesn't.
prime minister does not deliver bad news. If you go back to the many press conferences and so on, when we had the period of COVID, you know, so
So we wait for it.
Yeah.
We wait for it until then.
Yeah. Somebody. You mean? Thank you, caller. Thanks for calling. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
There's something that I was thinking. I said it's so funny. I mean, the prime minister has so many. The last time we checked, I think there were 7 ministries that she's minister of. If I'm not mistaken, somebody could correct me. But the last time that we did a count, I think it's probably 7 or more ministries. And I was thinking today, why she didn't reshuffle herself away, Mr. Lewis, from the planning and development. That's quite interesting. I want to ask a question. I don't know. This is usually a casual question, but Miss McClean is here, who's been on the in government for a number of years. Have we, for a prime minister to be minister, to have planning and development?
it's standard. It's standard. That typically has fallen on the prime ministers. What the prime minister has done is change the rules. The legislation has changed somewhat, and in terms of the process of approvals, etc. But that normally would fall under most prime ministers in recent years would have held that portfolio. But as I said, when you look at the legislation and the process of approvals, etc., changes were made, right? So I was looking here, Marcia. The Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, National Security, the Public Service. Then, of course, we had things like Water Authority added on, culture. So the Prime Minister's portfolio has been enlarged, it's been expanded significantly since she has become Prime Minister. And it really and truly, it's an interesting mix. But if I could, Marcia, if you don't have a call, I want to say something about Senator Crystal Haynes and what normally happens, because I've heard a lot, but I think in looking at what has transpired, I do not understand why. There was a reason given, and I call it finessing. You have to present something that is palatable, but is that really the basis for which a decision was taken? Now, in the normal scheme of things, before political parties or the government and the opposition go to parliament, whether it's the House or Senate, there are parliamentary group meetings. And the purpose of those meetings, the purpose is to make decisions on how you will debate. At that occasion, people will say, look, I have to speak from my conscience. Okay? And there are times, so you call it taking the whip off, because the notion is that there's somebody who keeps you in line and whatever, and you told the particular line. But there are issues, say, for example, something like casino gambling, right? That would be a classic example of where MPs or senators will say, I have to speak according to my conscience. And so let's say, and so you will speak to your conscience, and if it is something that you totally cannot tolerate, you would leave. But normally there is room to do that. Now, a problem could have arisen if, for example, and remember that Senator Haynes did not vote. She absented herself after putting on the record her position, which I think was important. She felt strongly enough the issue is sufficiently important, not only to her and to people of St. James or whatever, but to Barbados, to people who visit this country, and she felt compelled to speak her mind. Now, she absented herself after. So in essence, because let's say, for example, there was a vote and she voted against it, and it was defeated, then she would have gone against her political party. She did
Mhm.
not do that. She said, however, I cannot be silent or I cannot support. And that, as far as I know, is allowed as formerly the government business. These were decisions where people would say, I have to speak on this. My opinion is different from most people, and you're given that freedom. So my concern was, what was so wrong to have to remove her? Because you can tell me McClean place. Why did it then take out Senator Charles Morris? You know, he's an older person. His contribution, well, I will say a little about his contributions, but I believe that he would not have been missed as much, except to be sitting in Parliament. If you listen, you would hear the kind of contributions he makes, the interventions. We were talking about listening in silence just now. I wouldn't say any more on that. So really and truly, there, to my mind, there was no reason why she should have been penalized, and I would have to be told by somebody, you know, by herself that, and even then, that decision was not necessary. Let me put it that way, because for an issue of important as that, people should have been given the leeway to speak their minds and express to the public their personal positions. As I said, the line would be drawn when it came to vote, because at the end of the day, remember, she's a government senator and they're going to Parliament to make decisions. Now, when a piece of legislation is brought, if they do what is normally done, you should know the outcome, you know, and the positions of your parliamentary group. So I really don't understand, but again, I think it's consistent with the leadership of the day.
Yes, that, as you were saying, man, to the seniors, over to Miss McClean. I had to put that in.
Very quickly, all the Barbadians are always typically on time. If they're going to be an hour early, they prefer to be an hour early than 10 minutes late. Shakwani, newsflash. The unfortunate reality is, and this is why I cannot understand, well, no, I understand why I would say that a reshuffle at this time is not planned. It was forced. A reshuffle will create disruption. And it isn't only the minister. He will need more than a month. I hear him talking. He will need more than a month, because I think he has a lot to learn. But you're breaking the ministry in pieces, into two pieces. So what's going to have to happen? They got to decide which piece goes where and all of that. But I would, Nigel, I am happy to say that this document here, report of the Parliamentary Reform Commission, I got my copy today. And I don't think they can kill me for this. I don't know what they plan to do. Training of parliamentarians is a recommendation inside of there, right? I think you mentioned the issue of need to be trained in the art of governance and so on. And this was one of the things that we put forward as a recommendation. Rose, you will not hear anything on education because it was not included in the list of the ministries for the second year running to be considered. And the ministry last year, they had health, because between the Ministry of Health and Education, they're the two largest elements, you know, the two ministries that get the single largest pieces of the budget. But I want to say, in relation to this whole thing, we talked about the reshuffle, but you know what the Prime Minister stuck in there? BERT 3. Let me count. BERT 3, 1, 2, 3. And beyond my comment about her being afraid of taking on the leader, the opposition, I believe that what is coming is going to be tough, and it's going to be a lot of bad news. She will not be the bearer of bad news. I happened to run into the governor of the Central Bank yesterday, coming down the steps of Parliament. I guess he had a meeting with the Prime Minister, and this is probably part of the discussion about BERT 3. That is what Barbadians have to look out for. There's been a lot of borrowing, and they're going to have to service those debts. I believe it's going to cost over $1 billion a year to service the foreign debt. The economists will help us to understand, but just tighten your belt, put on your seatbelts, because we have to tighten our belts and let us look forward. Well, we got to hear what's happening. So we are, you know, this has created a whole set of uncertainty, adding to the additional problems. But my focus is, what will that third iteration of the IMF arrangements mean for us.